With so many conversations within the advertising technology ecosystem, it's challenging to differentiate between headlines, opportunities, trends, and long-term solutions. Let's pull back the industry curtain for a casual, direct conversation about the changing state of ad tech over a cup of coffee. Welcome to the Adtech Cafe. So, Richie, with so many conversations in the advertising technology ecosystem, which you and I live and breathe in every day, it's really tough to figure out what's news, what's not news, what's press releases, what are trends, and sometimes it's not so tough. And I've been intrigued about Iris TV, and as the president, I'd love to get your thoughts on what it's all about, what you guys have been up to, and then take it from there.
Yeah, no, well, firstly, thanks for having me today and in our lovely cafe here. And so, well, really, firstly, what Iris TV is, we're a video data platform. And so what that really means is that we are sort of in the business of connecting information about a piece of content. Predominantly, we focus on video to transaction methods. And so think about things like contextual targeting or brand safety and sort of brand suitability. Filters and targeting techniques, they're all rooted in understanding what the content is that's adjacent to a piece of advertising. And I think in our space over the years, that definition of what that content is has obviously changed. We've had search queries, we've had articles and written text, we've had pictures and audio, and I'm sure we'll have many things in the future. Now, sort of the one thing that we see that's different in the video environment is the lack of sort of a data accessibility around what that actual content is. And so really think about what a video data platform is making that data accessible, predominantly from publishers, assigning identifiers to that piece of content, very similar to that of a page URL in an article, and then using that to understand in the moment of an ad transaction, what type of content is the consumer watching? Is it, a certain food and beverage related piece of content? Is it something that has a certain emotional response? And so really we've been in the business about how do we simplify the data workflows to make that happen. It's a very complicated ecosystem that we work in.
Yeah, I bet.
And how do we really just increase transparency at the end of the day?
Got it. So the notion of accessibility, is that different than interoperability, which seems to be a buzzword that's going on?
I think it's actually, yes, it's different, but both equally important. I think in the video space, we have sort of two sides of the equation. We have the streaming delivery technology platforms. So, platforms that specialize in storing the content, encoding, transcoding, delivering that file.
Yep.
Obviously, free ad-supported streaming content is exploded. We've got a whole host of new types of technology companies to make that possible. So on one side, we've got this very complicated storage and distribution process now, which is amazing for us as consumers. So it totally changed the way that we all consume. And then on the other side, we have the ad tech ecosystem. So how do we know that there's an ad opportunity? How do we package it? How do we bid on it? How do we make sure that it actually completed? And so accessibility across these systems is a lot of work. And as an industry, we're not perfect at it by any means. We're a very fragmented industry. And then once you have made that more accessible, making it interoperable across all those platforms, also a very big challenge. So I think as it pertains to sort of information about content, both are areas of improvement, maybe is how I'd coin it, given we've got a lot of different constituents and companies that we have to sort of pipe this data across.
So if you could list 3 problems that Iris can solve, can you rank them, or there's so many, I would imagine, because it's a growing medium, right? And people are figuring it out and brands are flocking to it, which is fantastic. Or let me put it differently. What do they need to be wary about when they go into a CTV like buy?
The CTV space has had amazing growth over the last 4 to 5 years, and what comes with that is some gaps and holes and things that we as an industry need to sort of fill. I think things that we have been very focused on. Maybe I give sort of three different examples.
Yeah, that'd be great.
One of them is there's like a big buzz around contextual targeting. So how we kind of talk about it is just targeting the topic of content adjacent to the ad. There's a lot of power about that. I think to us as consumers, like it's kind of logical, right? Like I've got an ad, I'm going to put it next to a piece of content that actually is relevant and makes sense. And us as consumers, it probably will perform better. So I think one of the use cases that we've been spending a lot of time with both buyers and sellers, I think both just as important, is how do we help unlock what that topic of content is as a standardized approach.
Because right now, brands can't see that. Is that right? Is that right now? Are they kind of blind to what they're getting?
Opaque.
Is that it?
It's very opaque. The transparency is a big issue right now, and it's not necessarily that there's a transparency problem because someone in the market has decided that they want to hide it all.
Yeah.
It's mostly that like it's a very complicated distribution path, and as I said, CTV has grown so rapidly over the past 4 or 5 years that we've got some areas that we just need to improve. So when buyers are buying CTV, they do have some transparency in some locations. So publishers, as an example, can certainly pass things like, metadata around the piece of content. There are some legal things that publishers obviously are very wary of. Things like the Video Protection and Privacy Act does create some restrictions on passing things like the show and the episode and the season number and some of that data in the bid request. That's something publishers have to be very careful of. But you can pass tags and categories and so other data. So there is the ability to see some of that. It's not consistent, which is quite a challenge.
Like there's no common taxonomy, right?
No, and it's entered by editors at the end of the day that are entering that data probably for search reasons or internal search or SEO. It's not being created as the premise of enriching the OpenRTB spec. That's for sure. So there's some consistency issues that can certainly be improved. And then at the end of the day, we need sort of a common, not necessarily a common taxonomy, but we need a single process for scoring all of the content that is attached to that advertising buy, right? So as an example, sort of what we do is we're in the business of, again, sort of helping streamline the data. We create a content identifier that we call the Iris ID, and we append that ID to each video that sort of comes into our system. Now, what's stored on that Iris ID is definitions from third-party contextual and brand safety companies that we sort of help onboard. And basically what they're doing is they're scoring all of the content that the Iris platform sees. Why that's impactful is that if we have an advertiser that says, hey, I'm looking to target travel-related content, maybe I'm American Express, and I want to put an ad in front of the person at the moment in time that they're watching, travel content for their next vacation or whatever it might be, then it's really important to the advertiser that the definition of that travel content is consistent across all supply sources. And that's, to anyone in digital, like that's very obvious. That's how it works in display. You take a page URL and you scrape the text and you classify it into a taxonomy. But those kind of things haven't been sort of present as much, haven't been present in CTV. So that's one of them. Contextual targeting would be something. And why do we care about that? Back to the purpose of like the fundamental logic of it, putting an ad next to a piece of content that is aligned actually performs better. And that's proven. Like it outperforms demo targeting, it outperforms bid stream data targeting. It leads to higher like mind and mood set, that are drivers for outcomes. So
and are you helping with that measurement piece as part of the classification of the content?
We ourselves are not. So we are not directly. So we are providing a signal that can be decoded for the targeting. Now, what we are starting to work on now is post-impression reporting, measurement, verification. And again, because we're just providing an ID, a content identifier, that content identifier could be picked up pre-impression and used to target in the scenario we just went through, but it can also be picked up post-impression. So if a measurement company who's sort of in the business of measurement, we ourselves are certainly not, would like to understand the content that was exposed at the ad impression level, they would be able to pick up the Iris ID and decode that value and say, hey, let me understand what that content was. And sort of the way that we talk to sort of the industry about it is, if you think about what a page URL is, a page URL is just an identifier, and it's included. I mean, it's included in so many facets of what we do. It's included in the page scraping. I mean, every time you look at where an impression ran, you look at the page URL. So really, we think about our ID as sort of akin to the page URL, and anything that a page URL is used in, theoretically, a content ID can have an application as well. It's just the curve of evolution.
Yep. So are we talking about is there in the CTV space, are we talking about, are there some similarities to the open internet and the walled gardens? And if so, how much does that differ in your goal to create this notion of contextual transparency?
It's very similar. It's like similar but different. Similar in that in the open web, or maybe in like display, the industry has always, again, used a page URL to identify what the page is, right? And so, over the years, we've had brand safety turned into brand suitability. We've had the rise of contextual. All of those products are sort of like point solutions sitting on top of the concept of, if I can get a page URL, I can scrape the text on the web page, and I have a great data science team that can say, hey, we think that is X, whatever X is. Right. So in terms of, again, the CTV side is the lack of a page URL. Of course, we're watching a big screen. We don't have pages anymore. Means that we need to sort of evolve to identify the video or the piece of content. Like a lot of these issues are prevalent in audio, right? So again, in the audio space, we have issues with some advertisers saying, hey, look, I don't want to buy podcasts. I don't know what I'm buying. And there's reasons for that. But again, if you have the ability to create sort of content data platforms, very similar to audience data platforms, just we're talking about a different asset at the end of the day, then you should be able to buy and transact and understand in the same way. So I think there's many parallels. I mean, at the end of the day, the business was born out of the evolution from open web to CTV, and companies saying, hey, we don't know what video is playing adjacent to the ad. And this ad, and this is years ago, looking at the online video space, and most of that was driven by, a display ad was costing $3 or $4, a video ad was costing 15, 16, 17. And as the price started to increase, then the risk increases, or the waste increases, or both. Totally. And so CTV just sort of like stepped the bar up even further, was like, oh, actually ads are $27, $40, $50. Yeah. And they have the same transparency issues. So there's definitely a lot of parallels to that space. On the walled gardens, what's actually very interesting is that the walled gardens are like a little bit ahead of the ball in some of these regards, because it's a closed ecosystem. Yeah. So some of the power of like the open internet and everything that we obviously specialize in is that we can, theoretically reach content anywhere for any consumer at any moment. And we have the ability to be interoperable. We can swap video players. We can swap ad servers and SSPs. Like, there's all these options, which is super healthy. Also means there's a lot of complexity. We've got to pipe a lot of things together based on these bespoke sort of supply chains that everyone wants to execute through. Yeah. The walled gardens don't have that issue. So as an example, in YouTube has had sort of a brand safety partnership program for a long time. And when whatever the process is to be, approved partner in the ecosystem is what it is. Once you get into it, you only have one content management system to work with, YouTube's. You only have one ad server, YouTube's. Right. You only have one DSP. So it's like now the scale is a different complexity. You got a lot of content. Yeah. From the supply path is binary. It's like, get the content, analyze it, put the segment in the DSP. So again, we're trying to bring the same capabilities. I mean, that performs really well, and advertisers do like it for those reasons. So we really want to bring like the power from the walled gardens, the power that we've had from the beginnings of the display world, and say, like, let's bring the same capabilities to CTV, but let's be cognizant that like it's different. We're going to have to sort of rebuild the supply chain a little bit to make it possible.
So it seems to me that the control is always going to be in the hands of the folks that get there first to some degree, and then you get the folks that get there second and third, and they don't have walled gardens, to your point, potentially, and you have to create awareness and get that going out there. And therefore, to make the money, we can go out and sell ads, or we can sell, subscriptions. And for those who are selling ads, the reach mechanism of CTV and what they can do there needs to be proven. Are we seeing that we're getting to the tipping point that advertisers can compare to CTV with linear from what you see? Are you what are you hearing from advertisers when they start to, or are you already past that and you're already being like, yeah, you're already doing it. Let me just fix it for you. Let me make it better, make it more visible, get to targeting, all that fun stuff.
I think we've still got lots to do. I don't think it's like we're not there at the end. I mean, at the end of the day, I think we're like in the first inning of CTV. Like, from an infrastructure, I mean, the audience has certainly shifted, but like we've still got a lot of audience still to shift, and I'm personally very confident it will. So I think there's still a big evolution of like what the supply growth will look like.
So sorry to interrupt you. What is if first inning is now, what does the fifth inning and the ninth inning look like?
Oh man, I mean, I think the fifth inning, hopefully we've got all the interoperable technology pieces solved. I think like in order to get to the holy grail of like, we know exactly what we bought and we know exactly the measured impact. And that's not just for the buyer, that's for the seller. It's like, I sold my inventory, maximize the value. Like, we need a very clean supply chain. And like, it's going to take some time to do that. And that's not clean supply chain in the sense of like bad actors. I just mean like we need visible data running through all the different places that it needs to be. And clearly, obviously, we're talking a lot about like content data, but I mean, the audience data's got a whole set of things that it's got to upgrade and change. And let's assume that things like IP address and other things don't get pulled out. And then we got to like deal with how do we identify a household. I mean, there's a lot still to do. So I think hopefully by like the fifth inning, we've kind of progressed through those things, and maybe we're not seeing like the same ad 3 times in a row in an ad pod. Like that's a symptom of the tech.
Right. That's a great example. Right. It's a perfect example. I wonder how much money is being held on the sidelines. And maybe, do you have any ideas of what the target addressable market? I mean, I know linear is probably like 68 billion a year.
Yeah.
I don't know the total. I don't know the number for CTV. Is it in the 30s now?
In all honesty, like
I should have looked that up before we got started.
every time there's a new stat, I don't even remember what it is, and it changes, and then all of a sudden, fast, free ad supported streaming is going to be bigger than cable and broadcast in 2 years or something, and it didn't even exist 3 years ago. It's like mind-boggling that an industry as big as linear is going to get toppled that quickly. But that's the beauty of like going direct to consumers and building everything. And I mean, this is the beauty of digital, like things can explode. And I do think like we have some really important players that have really aided in that, like the OEMs getting into the market in the way that they have with the device, distribution footprint that they have. Like, I mean, that opens up a lot of scale and eyeballs that maybe would have changed, the growth trajectory. Obviously, we've got people like Roku who've done a really great job. But the fact that the Samsungs, Vizios, LGs, Hisense, like TCL, all these guys can just flick on light switches, and all of a sudden we've got cable networks of the future with huge addressable markets already in the household is pretty phenomenal. So I think that sort of helped. But yeah, we still got a lot to do.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's good. So if I get it, when you go out and talk to the publishers mainly, right? I mean, obviously it's always a two-sided question because you have to validate that the advertisers need this while you're talking to the publishers. I wonder how much of a Can remember when in the linear TV side, folks are trying to get a pool of inventory together where they can create a taxonomy and try and expedite the packaging thereof. Do you see that kind of packaging effort through your conversations with publishers? Do they think that there's enough competition out there that we need to consolidate into these buckets? Do we see more mini walled gardens, but through open taxonomy and through more transparency?
Not yes and no. I mean, there's a lot of conversations around like, again, I say that we have a transparency issue, not because there's people holding things back because we've got work to do, but there's lots of conversations in every vertical, in every regard. I think one of the really important pieces, and this is like the push and the pull struggle, and like we ourselves try not to get ourselves in the middle of it, just based on our sort of neutral positioning, but is the role of third-party data partners as a verified, unbiased third party is not going to change, in our opinion. So,
what does that mean? What do you mean by that? What's you say that again?
So, like, when we're talking about like taxonomies and like how do we define what the content is again in this regard, I think it is very important to have a third party that can score all of the content across all of these very large and distributed supply footprints. Not because there's a bad actor on the sell side. It's not because there's, they're telling everyone it's brand safe or they're telling everyone what it isn't. It's mostly that you need a consistent score and scoring framework across all supply sources. And that is very important to advertisers, both from, again, having that third-party verified vendor, but it's in terms of impact and measurement and reach and like, what am I buying? What is working? If you have 100 different definitions of the topic sports, you've got this networks version and that networks, you've got, and then again, we're talking about CTV, but you've got online video and we've got, display and we've got mobile. Like, you need a consistent definition of what is sports. And so the third-party data companies, obviously like the DVs and IASs from a verification perspective, have been there for a reason. The contextual companies like the Gums and the Grape Shots, like they've been there for a reason. So I think they're going to have a big seat at the table here, where they're a partner to the sell and the buy side on creating a standard definition. Now, with that said, we don't necessarily believe that you all need to agree on one taxonomy. That sort of like harms a lot of the evolution, right? There's lots of different ways that these, especially the computer vision companies, can actually create these definitions. So it doesn't make any sense to have one taxonomy for everyone, right? You can still have different flavors, but when you're going to score, the distribution of a large scale media campaign, the definition of that buy has to be consistent, or else what are we buying? How do we know what worked? So
who's that? That's the IAB. Those are standards bodies that are going to bring that together. Who does that?
No, I think that's kind of what we do. At the end of the day, we create a framework and an ID that can be interoperably used by any of these data companies, by any of the sellers and buyers. And it's really about the seller and the buyer saying, hey, I want to transact around this sports event, whatever it is. Let's say sports to be broad. Then to say, hey, if I'm an advertiser and I'm going to buy across 50 supply sources, I just want to understand the same definition of sports. So they'll pick one data company that perhaps they lean to for a variety of reasons. It's up to them. And then the value of that transaction still needs to be had between the seller and the buyer, right? So again, now we've got a single currency, if you will, tied to a single signal, which is what we provide.
Super valuable.
Same stuff that we talk about in audience data all the time. It's not really
totally
different. And now we can determine like, hey, when I bought this for $20, that was bought at this moment in time on this publisher, I can actually measure what the outcome was with a standard definition, not holes and gaps. So
it's critical.
Those are the kind of things that we're trying to push to. I think one of the things actually really cool, if you look at some of these taxonomies, is we talk about like the IAB style contextual categories. Nothing wrong with that as it pertains to the IAB, but there's a lot more to video than these these standard segments.
Emotion, right?
I mean, it's like, and the amount of like the performance of an ad based on the emotional response that a video, I mean, all of us as consumers, you watch something, you get angry, then you cry,
Yeah,
and then someone shows you an ad and you're like, oh, like that's like the marketer's holy grail. So
totally.
the fact that we can figure out like sight, sound, and motion data as from like an actual emotional affinity, and then tie that to an outcome. That's the power of sight, sound, and motion as opposed to text on a web page. So
Totally.
yeah,
No
there's a lot
question.
of cool stuff out there, and I don't think we need one standard definition. Like, let's let all the innovation run wild. Let's just create a highway that all the data can be made accessible and consistent.
Makes total sense. Super simple. We just
if
need
only,
somebody to
if
do it. Will
only
you
it
do
does.
that? Will you do that for us?
Working on it. Working on it. I mean, it takes an industry. I think at the end of the day, that's
Yeah.
part of the fun. I think on our end, I think, you got days you bang your head against the wall, and you've got other days that celebrate the small wins. But I think part of the really fun side of it for us is the amount of different companies across the supply chain that we get to work with. And I don't think we could highlight a single company in a single vertical that's resisting. I think everyone's leaning in, and some have more work to do than others, but
Yeah.
the collaboration has been really cool. I was on a call with an agency leader, and I think we had 6 different companies on this call from 6 different verticals to like bring whatever this product was we're integrating on. And I think the agency was like, wow, this is really cool. Like I don't get on calls with sell side ad servers, publishers, and
Yeah.
like it's very rare. Like this is like, we're really excited. This is going to be, just an awesome opportunity. And so I think that's part of the fun.
Yeah, that's really cool. And so just a couple more questions before we order the check. The demand side and who's leading the way for the push, right? Because we need the buy side to somehow get consolidated in what they want, right?
Yeah.
And so just as much as we get the sell side to not have to worry about their packaging and their inventory, get the value that they need, right? Deservedly. Then we also need to hear from the buy side how they think about emotional through sight, sound, and emotion and outcomes, right? So is there anything going on there? Somebody's leading the way besides yourselves, not in competition to yourselves, but that other mouthpiece in the market?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot. So I'd say we are built a business on chicken and eggs is how we like to
Yeah,
call
exactly.
it. Many chickens and eggs.
Yeah.
And so I think over the last 2 years, what we've been mostly focused on is the sell side and how do we get the signals into market? How do we have the right currencies tied to them? How do we have the right incentives in place? And so how do we really get like a large scale beta, right? If you were to call it, where advertisers, agencies and sellers can sort of come together and say, hey, let's use this data, let's see how it performs, and let's sort of determine the next steps from there. So I think we've, as an industry, done a really good job to get ourselves through that initial beta. And again, to that point of like an ad against a piece of content that's relevant actually performs, like it actually performs. And so a lot of without going into like a ton of case study data, but a lot of the programmatic buys that we end up seeing, they're optimizing for things like cost per completed views and still basic metrics. We're still in the early days. And an ad next to a relevant piece of content performs better. Therefore, the buyers bid higher. Therefore, the CPMs rise for the publishers, and they still get a more effective cost per completed view. Like that metric actually declines. So the buyer's like, this makes nothing but sense. I spent more, sure, but I got a much more effective buy than I had, and the publisher's happy in the platform. That has then, so that's kind of like gets us through maybe last year. I think most of the focus now is, okay, I ran these in these betas. I want to run it everywhere. How do I do that? And so I think a lot of the charge now is being led by the agencies. And I put that charge led in sort of 3 buckets. There's one bucket of more performance focused app agencies that can see the value on the contextual side of things and like really want to lean into that. And so they're requesting it for contextual targeting solutions, regardless of sort of what method. It could be a DSP, could through an SSP. Second are others that have a brand suitability problem and have brand advertisers that are either very sensitive or very specific in the types of content that they want to be associated with.
Yeah.
And so they're making requests for more blocking tactics. And I don't think that's a bad thing for publishers. I think we, sometimes like, oh, we don't want any blocking. You're gonna, block all my content. I think in a lot of instances right now we're over blocking. If you talk to any news publisher right now, like we're blocking all of news. Like, firstly, that's terrible for the publisher. That's also bad for the advertiser. There's a lot more.
Well, this is where measurement's going to fix that, right? When you can start to see the impact of running on news. I mean, that's huge.
Exactly. So that's, you've got that second bucket of like, suitability and how do I open up inventory actually, but also remove the bad stuff. And then the third one is exactly what you said, is partners who are leaning into like post impression reporting. Yeah. And we put lots of stuff under that bucket. It could be a true measurement use case, understanding the content exposure from a measurement point of view. It could be verification, like, hey, we said we were going to do X, and from a suitability perspective, did we? Or it could be more insights and reporting. Like, I ran all these campaigns through the year. What did what worked? Like, what should I do next year? How do I inform the plan and sort of like complete the media cycle? So, it's definitely been great to see, and it obviously there's lots still to do, but it's been great to see the agency sort of, lean in and start to sort of drive the initiative of where they really want this to go.
Yeah, and as there's more supply, there's just going to continue to be more interest, and that's what's going to drive the momentum at the end of the day. I mean, the train's on the tracks, right? So it's great to hear all the progress that you're making with all of this. I think it's critical, and I know that for Adform's advertisers, this is right in the wheelhouse of give me more, make sure it's legit, right? And then work with partners that can figure it out so I can have consistency. And so that's why I'm excited to continue to learn from you about how to do that. Now we can partner with all of that stuff. So how long has Iris been around?
We've been in business for 9 years. And
right
so the business started with, we've always been in the video space and video data. We initially built a video recommendations engine, which we still operate and run today. And that sort of the focus for that is how do we increase supply? So how do we create more engagement? But sort of the reason that the business has expanded into these new verticals is we've always integrated with content management systems, CDNs, video players. And so as the industry's evolved and privacy's become an issue and CTV exploded and all these elements, we actually ended up getting requests like, you guys know what content is playing.
Yeah, it's great.
The ad ecosystem doesn't. Can you sort of bring the two together? So we've been working on the data solution since 2020 at this point.
Yeah, smart. It's smart. Well, I enjoyed hanging out with you here at the cafe, man. And
this was awesome.
Super jazzed that you could join us. I don't know if you want to call an Uber, if you got your own ride. We didn't drink much while we were here, so not worried about you getting home.
Yeah, well, next time we'll have to do it in person. We'll have to come to the same coffee shop.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of being in Philly and New York, but those aren't such bad cities to be in.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Well, cool, man. It was great to see you. Thanks for educating us on this super important topic. And next one's on me.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me.